Is it possible that we are not the first iteration of ourselves? Is it conceivable that the chronology we accept, the timeline that stretches back only a few thousand years to the dawn of established civilization, is merely a meticulously crafted second draft? We live within a vast silence, surrounded by monuments and mysteries that refuse to fit neatly into our authorized history books. Think for a moment about the overwhelming sense of absence, the gaping holes in the record where evidence of a truly high culture should exist, preceding Sumer and Egypt. This absence is not the passive result of natural erosion. It carries the chilling implication of deliberate erasure. It feels like walking into an immense library where every single volume detailing the First Age was systematically incinerated, leaving only scattered, scorched fragments and the terrifying memory of the fire itself. What if the ultimate catastrophe was not a mistake of nature, but an act of judgment executed by those who had the capacity to engineer the very landscape of our reality? We speak of the Anunnaki, those beings referenced in the clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia, not as mythical deities, but as highly advanced, non-terrestrial architects who arrived on this nascent world with a specific, perhaps proprietary, objective. The commonly accepted narrative suggests they merely manipulated primal hominids to create Homo sapiens as a labor force, a servant species. But what if that version, already extraordinary, is itself a sanitized account designed to mask a far darker truth? What if the Anunnaki did not merely create the first humanity, but eventually found it necessary, for reasons that challenge our deepest understanding of moral authority and cosmic control, to destroy it completely? This proposition forces us to confront an unnerving possibility. Our current civilization is not a glorious, singular ascent, but a constrained, carefully monitored sequel. The first experiment, the original humanity, must have reached a terrifying threshold, perhaps acquiring knowledge too potent, achieving independence too quickly, or simply developing an inherent flaw deemed irredeemable by its creators. If the Anunnaki were capable of terraforming, of creating life, they were certainly capable of unmaking it. Imagine the sheer scale of such a purge. Not a localized flood or a regional disaster, but an epical reset, designed to leave behind just enough genetic and mythological residue to restart the process, yet scrubbed clean of the dangerous intellectual and spiritual memory of what came before. The nagging feeling that something is profoundly wrong with our collective memory persists. Why do virtually all ancient cultures across disparate continents share strikingly similar myths of global catastrophe, divine intervention, and the survivors being guided by star people or sky gods? These are not coincidences born of primitive fears. They are echoes of a shared traumatic event, a memory so vast and so terrifying that it was embedded deep within the human psyche, surviving the physical obliteration of its context. It is the ghost limb syndrome of history. We feel the presence of a lost past that our official historical record insists never existed. We look at the megalithic structures of the Andes, the precision of Göbekli Tepe, and the impossible geometry of the Giza Plateau, and we are forced to ask, were these monuments built by the ancestors of the second humanity struggling out of the Stone Age, or were they the remnants, the unintended survivors, of the first technologically sophisticated but ultimately condemned civilization? If these ideas of controlled cycles and deliberate destruction resonate with you, if they stir a deep-seated curiosity that demands more than simple dismissal, then we are already walking the path of discovery together. Understanding this potential rewrite of history requires patience and a willingness to question every foundational myth we hold dear. If you feel compelled to join this deep dive into the archives of the forgotten, take a moment now to ensure you are subscribed and that you hit that like button. It is a small gesture, but it helps amplify this investigation, drawing more minds into this critical reflection, allowing us to collaboratively scrutinize the fragmented evidence the ancient world left behind. The key to unlocking this scenario lies in the motivation of the Anunnaki. Why would they execute such a comprehensive genocide of their own creation? The Sumerian texts, when viewed through the lens of forensic investigation rather than religious scripture, hint at deep internal conflicts among the gods themselves. Perhaps the first humanity was destroyed not because of its innate wickedness, but because it had become a pawn in a larger interplanetary power struggle, a biological weapon that had gone rogue, or simply an investment that had failed to yield the expected return. The original human, the Lulu Amelu, might have been too independent, too quick to grasp the levers of creation and destruction, perhaps even challenging the authority of the very beings who fashioned them from clay and genetic manipulation. When the Great Reset occurred, it was not a sudden, chaotic collapse, but a highly organized dismantling. The infrastructure of the First World, its technological base, its scientific libraries, its methods of spiritual attainment, had to be neutralized. Think of the psychological impact. Not just death, but the total annihilation of meaning. The surviving progeny, those few chosen or accidental remnants, were then conditioned to view the cataclysm as a divine flood, a purifying wrath, ensuring that future generations would approach knowledge with fear and reverence, never with the aggressive, questioning freedom that may have characterized the first race. This leads us to the critical distinction between the two humanities. The first may have been designed for self-sufficiency, intended to carry a greater genetic mandate, perhaps even intended to blend with the Anunnaki lineage over time. The second humanity, our humanity, appears to be burdened with engineered limitations. We struggle immensely with concepts of universal energy. We are often plagued by self-doubt and internal conflict, and our technological progress, while rapid, often seems to hit invisible ceilings, especially concerning propulsion, longevity, and free energy systems. Is this a natural evolutionary pathway, or are these limitations the result of a deliberate genetic and psychological dampening implemented during the recreation phase? The evidence for this controlled re-entry can be seen in the immediate establishment of strict hierarchical structures after the supposed flood. Suddenly, we see the rise of priest-kings, intermediaries who claim direct lineage or communication with the sky gods. These figures were crucial in establishing the new historical record, emphasizing subservience and ritual over innovation and inquiry. They were the compliance officers, ensuring that the second humanity stayed within the designated parameters, never aspiring to reclaim the dangerous intellectual freedoms of the lost age. The lingering question that haunts this entire investigation is whether the Anunnaki truly left, or if they merely transitioned from active managers to silent observers. If they committed such a devastating act of historical vandalism once, the mechanism for destruction must still be in place. We must consider that our current global society is under continuous surveillance, not merely by benign protectors, but by cosmic custodians dedicated to preserving the new order, an order defined by the enforced amnesia of the destruction of the first humanity. Every major leap we take in technology, in genetics, or in challenging the established historical narrative might be viewed as a potential red flag, signaling the dangerous resurgence of the very traits that necessitated the first brutal purge. If the history books truly were rewritten, then our current reality is built upon a foundation of strategic omissions. The terrifying truth is that we may be living out a story penned by the very beings who judged our predecessors unworthy of existence. To understand why we are here, we must first accept the possibility of the other humanity that failed and the terrible price of their ambition. The narrative of the Anunnaki is not just about ancient visitors. It is about cosmic property rights, genetic experimentation, and the chilling realization that perhaps, just perhaps, the destruction was justified from their superior, non-human perspective. We are the survivors of a cosmic cleanup operation, and the rules of engagement are still being enforced, even if the enforcement mechanisms are subtle, psychological, and integrated into the very fabric of our mythological and political systems. The question is not simply what happened to the first humans, but whether the seeds of their destruction remain dormant within us, waiting for the next cycle of judgment to begin. This brings us to the core issue of control, and the terms of the unseen covenant that governs our present existence, a deep, unsettling thought that we must explore in the next part of this investigation. Is it possible that the greatest silence in our history is not the absence of knowledge, but the meticulously engineered absence of memory? We stand at a precipice, gazing back at the dawn of recognized civilization, only to find a peculiar emptiness, a discontinuity that academic archaeology struggles desperately to bridge. It is here, in the vast unexplained gulf between the sudden sophistication of Sumer and the primitive whispers that supposedly preceded it, that the shadow of the Anunnaki's potential judgment falls heaviest. If they did not merely create a second humanity, but first systematically destroyed, the implications reshape everything we accept as foundation, shifting our entire perspective from that of grateful inheritors to that of deliberately shielded survivors. We are forced to confront the chilling possibility that our historical record is a palimpsest, a document scraped clean and overwritten, designed not to inform us of our origins, but to ensure our profound and total forgetting of a previous catastrophic failure. Consider the mythology of worldwide deluge and cataclysm, narratives so deeply woven into the cultural fabric of disparate peoples across the globe. From the Mesopotamian tablets detailing Utnapishtim to the Mesoamerican accounts of successive suns being extinguished to the Norse legends of Ragnarok. These are often dismissed as localized flood events elevated to global significance. But what if they are synchronized, fragmented recollections of a single, coordinated, and utterly devastating global reset? A planetary scorched earth policy, enacted not by blind nature, but by conscious observers. The evidence of this theoretical first humanity is not found in well-preserved cities, for those would have been eradicated, but in the subtle, unnerving inconsistencies of our own inherited psyche. We carry a collective unnamed trauma, an ancestral sense of having been abandoned or exiled from a place of great knowing. This trauma, this inherent knowledge of a lost grandeur, manifests as the persistent curiosity that drives this investigation. If these ideas resonate within you, if you feel that familiar internal tremor suggesting that the mainstream narrative is inadequate, I urge you to pause and engage deeply with this exploration. This journey into the archives of the esquecimiento, the great forgetting, requires sustained attention, for the truth is not easily accessed, only gradually recognized. Share your initial thoughts on this concept of a first humanity. Were they simply too advanced, or were they perhaps too disobedient? Let us observe together. Liking and subscribing ensures that this crucial dialogue remains active, signaling to the algorithm that this search for buried truth deserves persistence. The Anunnaki, as the purported architects of this initial civilization, would have understood its failure intimately. Their role in the first cycle was perhaps not merely that of distant gods providing technology, but that of strict biological investors demanding a specific return on investment: gold, labor, and compliance. When that compliance faltered, when the genetic experiment developed agency beyond the parameters set by the observadores on high, the decision to wipe the slate clean becomes chillingly logical, if profoundly ruthless. Think of the sheer operational complexity involved in not just causing a destructive event, but ensuring that the few survivors retained exactly the level of memory necessary for survival, yet insufficient for revolutionary rebellion. This points not to chaotic destruction, but to an act of controlled, surgical deconstruction. We are left analyzing the debris field, the shards of knowledge that managed to slip through the sieve of this calculated historical filtration. Where are the remnants of this highly developed initial civilization, the ones who supposedly required the Anunnaki's presence to begin with? They are found in the cyclopean architecture of places like Pumapunku, a site that defies conventional chronology and engineering capabilities, appearing almost melted or scarred by some immense focused energy burst, not merely the slow decay of millennia. These megalithic remains whisper of a mastery over material science and gravitational principles that we are only now, in the 21st century, beginning to grasp. Yet these sophisticated remnants are often buried or found in isolated, high-altitude locations, suggesting a rapid inundation or a sudden shift in the Earth's crust, the residual effects of the purge. The implication is that the Anunnaki did not just leave. They left after administering the antidote to their own creation, obliteration. The destruction of the first humanity was perhaps the ultimate act of quality control, ensuring that the seeds of self-determination were not allowed to contaminate the next meticulously planned cycle. This concept introduces the most unsettling question. Was the extinction of the first race merely the prelude to the creation of the second, our current lineage, specifically engineered to be more manageable, more prone to worship, and perhaps crucially, endowed with a shorter, more docile lifespan? The physical evidence of the Great Reset is inscribed into the Earth's geology, if we dare to read past the established dogma. The sudden appearance of massive layers of vitrified soil, the evidence of globally dispersed microspherules, indicative of intense atmospheric heat and impact, and the rapid synchronous extinction of large megafauna around 12,000 years ago. While these are often attributed solely to cometary fragments or shifting climate, the timing aligns too perfectly with the mythological end times and the necessary window for a global civilization to be comprehensively erased, clearing the stage for the next genetic iteration. This destruction was efficient, total, and designed to leave no functioning infrastructure, a lesson learned by the observadors from their initial failed experiment. What we inherit is a civilization built on selective amnesia. Our deepest cultural structures, our impulse toward hierarchy, our fascination with distant heavens, our constant need to excavate and redefine our past, are simply echoes, the phantom limb pain of the first humanity's violent demise. The religious texts that survive often speak of the original sin or the fall from grace, narratives which may not describe a moral failure, but a tactical rebellion against the creator class. The fall was not moral. It was spatial and temporal, a violent displacement from a privileged state of existence. We must consider the possibility that the knowledge of the first humanity was not simply lost, but actively suppressed through the manipulation of Earth's resonant frequencies. If the Anunnaki possessed technology capable of intergalactic travel and genetic engineering, they certainly possessed the ability to broadcast a massive signal capable of disrupting the collective conscious memory of the survivors, creating a literal veil of forgetting, a psychic quarantine. This frequency shift might explain why many ancient sacred sites, constructed in alignment with the Earth's grid, appear to have been abandoned abruptly, their energetic purpose suddenly rendered inert. They might have been receiving stations for a type of consciousness that was intentionally silenced. This faint, lingering disruption is the signal we are attempting to detect, the ghost in the machine of our own history. The existence of the Anunnaki implies the existence of a recurring cycle. If they destroyed the first humanity due to deviation, What prevents them from performing the same action upon the second? We have reached similar pinnacles of technological complexity. We exhibit similar patterns of global conflict and resource mismanagement, and perhaps most critically, we have rediscovered the scientific means to manipulate the atom, a dangerous knowledge that may have been the very trigger for the first civilization's forced termination. The ultimate terror is not that history repeats itself, but that we are merely actors in a carefully maintained loop, perpetually nearing the moment of the Great Purge, governed by celestial timelines rather than human wisdom. The contrast between the two creations is stark. The first humanity was perhaps given too much power, too much freedom, leading to chaos and self-destruction, or perhaps threatening the creators themselves. The second humanity, us, was engineered for controlled advancement, given technology in measured doses, and anchored firmly to the necessity of physical labor and belief systems that reinforce hierarchy. Our inherent sense of inadequacy, our constant striving for perfection that remains perpetually out of reach, may simply be the psychological mechanism installed to prevent us from accessing the full spectrum of knowledge held by the civilizaciones perdidas. We are the mirror image of purpose, designed for servitude, while they were designed for partnership, a partnership that ultimately failed. The question of when the Anunnaki might return is not a matter of prophecy, but of mathematical observation of the cosmic clock. If their destruction of the first humanity was tied to specific celestial mechanics, to the orbital return of their home planet, or a specific alignment, then the current astronomical parameters may be aligning once more. The rising global preoccupation with unexplained aerial phenomena, the sudden declassification of historical records concerning contact, and the escalating tension around Earth's resources, could these simply be indicators that the observers are drawing closer, making their final assessment? The stage is being set, not for a reunion, but potentially for an audit. If you have stayed with this narrative, traversing the unnerving landscape of deliberately erased history and the chilling possibility of cyclical destruction, it means you recognize the profound importance of this investigation. We are not simply discussing ancient myths, we are analyzing the blueprint for potential future events. To ensure that this deep dive into the archives of the Anunnaki continues unhindered, I urge you to join this community of skeptical thinkers. Please subscribe to the channel, signal your support with a like, and share your most potent realization about this theory by commenting with the exact phrase, "The signal of forgetting is loud." Your participation in decoding this complex narrative is essential. We must continue to follow the subtle tracks left by the heranza of the first creation, preparing ourselves for the possibility of the ritorno, the inevitable reappearance of the architects of our existence. Join us for the next part, where we will examine the coded language within ancient texts that may reveal the specific method of the Anunnaki's final, devastating intervention. Is it possible that our historical timeline is not a linear ascent from primordial chaos, but rather a carefully managed second iteration, a corrected manuscript following a devastating editorial rejection? We stand at the precipice of recorded civilization, and the sheer intellectual velocity of early Sumer and Egypt presents an anomaly that traditional archaeology struggles to reconcile. We are taught to accept a gradual climb from hunter-gatherer societies, yet the evidence suggests a sudden, almost instantaneous blossoming of complex mathematics, astronomy, and sophisticated social structures. This yawning gap, this chasm between the alleged emergence of Homo sapiens and the sudden appearance of fully functioning civilization, is where the silence of the first humanity resides. The Anunnaki, if they are indeed the architects of our physical form, would have been faced with a profound engineering dilemma. The initial creation, the prototype designed for laborious extraction of precious materials, had somehow become compromised. This first iteration, often hinted at vaguely and fractured myths as a time of giants or a golden age of direct communion with the stars, was perhaps too successful in one critical, unforeseen aspect: its capacity for independent thought and spiritual resonance. A workforce is meant to be compliant, resilient, and focused on the task. What if the first human prototypes began to ask questions the creators were unwilling to answer? What if they evolved a consciousness that mirrored or even threatened to supersede the limitations of their own masters? The destruction of that original civilization was not merely an act of divine wrath, but a controlled demolition, a necessary sterilization of a dangerous evolutionary pathway. If the Anunnaki sought efficiency and long-term mineral yield, they could not tolerate a species that developed an immediate intrinsic curiosity about its own origins, or worse, the means to challenge the hierarchy imposed upon it. This speaks not of punishment, but of cold, calculated risk management on a cosmic scale. We must recognize the deeply unsettling implication that if the first destruction occurred, it was executed with such surgical precision that virtually no verifiable physical evidence remains, at least none that is accepted by mainstream historical consensus. The erasure was total, an act of historical violence designed to leave only blank pages for the subsequent narrative. Yet the memory persists, filtered down through the oldest, most fragmented flood myths and the pervasive cultural anxiety surrounding cycles of catastrophe. We inherit a psychological blueprint that contains an inexplicable, deep-seated fear of cyclical annihilation, a subconscious dread that the creators might return to inspect their handiwork and, finding it again wanting, decide that a third draft is necessary. To ponder this first annihilation is to face the fragility of our own existence, acknowledging that we might be living under a provisional lease, our tenancy dependent upon continued compliance with unseen, ancient cosmic rules. We are the reset humanity, fundamentally structured to avoid the philosophical and intellectual mistakes of our predecessors. But what were those mistakes exactly? They must have involved the acquisition of forbidden knowledge, the transgression of boundaries set by the observers who still hover just outside our collective awareness. If you find this contemplation of the deep past and the hidden architecture of consciousness compelling, I urge you to pause for a moment of quiet reflection, allowing these concepts to sink fully into your understanding. If this exploration of rewritten history resonates with your own inner sense that something fundamental is missing from the traditional story, please consider sharing your thoughts on this idea of the reset cycle in the comments below. Your engaged participation helps to map this unknown territory, and supporting the channel ensures we can continue to meticulously peel back these layers of engineered forgetfulness together. The nature of the second creation, the humanity we represent, reveals volumes about the failures of the first. If the first humans were too powerful, too knowing, then the subsequent model had to be fundamentally limited. Our current structure, short lifespans, fragmented memory across generations, a reliance on externally provided cultural structures, governments, religions for cohesion, can be seen not as flaws, but as deliberate safeguards. The short lifespan, the abrupt interruption of knowledge transfer every 80 to 100 years, ensures that revolutionary knowledge or collective memory of the reset event never solidifies enough to pose a systemic threat. We are hardwired for amnesia, forced to rediscover truths rather than inherit them directly. This enforced forgetfulness is the hallmark of the Anunnaki's success in managing the second attempt. They didn't just destroy a civilization, they neutralized the very mechanism of its evolutionary momentum. We see the residue of this neutralization in our persistent yearning for transcendence, that feeling of being an exile in our own home. Why do we feel so disconnected from the natural world, striving always to reach upward toward a non-terrestrial origin? This intense, almost pathological drive towards space exploration or technological singularity could be interpreted as a ghostly echo of the first humanity's struggle to reconnect with its creators, or perhaps its desperate search for an escape route before the inevitable reckoning. Our myths are littered with tales of previous worlds, swallowed by water or fire, not merely geological accidents, but acts of divine judgment. These are not cautionary tales against moral failure in the abstract sense. They are fragmented warnings about the penalties for challenging the hierarchy. They are stories of the Anunnaki returning to enforce the Great Cleansing. Consider the megalithic structures that predate established history. Göbekli Tepe, the precision stonework of pre-Inca cultures, the impossible alignment of certain ancient sites. These monuments, often inexplicably aligned to astronomical phenomena that may only have been visible thousands of years earlier, serve as infuriatingly silent witnesses. Were these constructed by the second humanity struggling to recall the tools and knowledge of the lost age, or are they the final, indestructible markers left behind by the destroyed race, markers intended to survive the cleansing and act as silent signals across the span of the Great Amnesia? If the latter is true, then we are not merely archaeologists uncovering the past, we are responding to a coded signal sent from beyond the historical firewall. The builders of these impossibly ancient sites were trying to tell us something vital about the cycles of creation and destruction, a concept far more terrifying than a simple flood, the concept of controlled, intelligent return and revision. The very concept of a golden age, a time when communication with the divine was direct and the earth was effortlessly abundant, may not be pastoral fantasy, but a distorted memory of the first humanity before the observers deemed the experiment a failure. That golden age ended violently, not through gradual decline, but through decisive intervention. The new era was inaugurated by the imposition of struggle, effort, and belief systems designed to redirect focus away from empirical truth and toward submission. By institutionalizing ritual and mystery, the architects ensured that the second humanity would seek meaning through belief, rather than through the direct empirical observation that perhaps empowered the first race to challenge their masters. This shift from knowledge to faith is a powerful systemic constraint. We are left sifting through the archaeological debris, desperately trying to distinguish between the intentional artifacts of the second creation and the defiant residue of the first. Every unexplained technological leap, every cultural parallel that spans continents seemingly unconnected, begins to look less like coincidence and more like the faint bleed-through of data from the erased hard drive. What if the mythical giants, or nephilim, were not simply large people, but the genetically more robust, perhaps physically superior outcome of the initial, purer Anunnaki genetic input, a race too grand, too close to the source, to be allowed to coexist with the corrected, scaled-down version that we represent? Their destruction was essential to ensure the psychological dominance of the creators over the new, compliant lineage. The inquietude deepens when we consider the current state of global affairs. If the Anunnaki are indeed cyclical observers, reappearing when their investment is threatened or when a critical threshold of unsustainable activity is reached, what signals might prompt their return? Is it resource depletion? Is it the development of technologies that allow us to mimic their celestial journeys? Or is it simply the emergence of a collective consciousness that begins once again to ask the dangerous questions about our true origins and the engineered nature of our reality? The very act of investigating the possibility of a destroyed first humanity could be the alarm bell that signals the next impending revision. We are touching the edges of the prohibited knowledge that doomed our predecessors, potentially unlocking the same evolutionary flaw that necessitated the Great Erasure. This is the crucial, terrifying pivot point in our investigation. We are not just studying history, we are running the risk of repeating its most devastating chapter. The key, then, lies not only in proving the existence of the first humanity, but in deciphering the exact nature of the transgression that brought the hammer down. Did they learn how to manipulate the source material of life itself? Did they discover the true location of Nibiru or the true purpose of the gold extraction? To understand the failure of the first experiment is to glimpse the vulnerability of the second, and this understanding may be the only defense we have against the inevitable cycle of the reset. If you have stayed with this relentless exploration, accepting the possibility that the very ground beneath our history is unstable, you have demonstrated a commitment to truth that few possess. This journey is not for the faint of heart, and the density of these concepts requires a dedicated mind. If you find value in this pursuit of hidden knowledge and wish to continue this descent into the shadowed corners of prehistory, please signal your dedication. Ensure you are subscribed to the channel and give this video a like to help spread this vital, if unsettling, hypothesis to others who are searching for answers. For a final reflection on this part of our investigation, comment below with the phrase, "The cycle demands amnesia." This phrase confirms your presence in this deep dive and connects your insights directly to our shared exploration. Do not stop here. The next phase of our investigation leads us directly to the few faint echoes, the secret structures and symbols that the first humanity managed to encode before their final silence. Join us immediately in Part 4, where we will examine the possibility of physical artifacts left behind as warning beacons for their successors. Where does the void begin? We speak of the destruction of a great civilization, a primeval humanity, perhaps gifted with knowledge too dangerous for its own good, or too defiant for its creator's tolerance. But the true terror is not the event itself, the apocalyptic flash, the wave of cleansing fire, or the seismic obliteration. The true terror resides in the subsequent, engineered silence. If the Anunnaki indeed destroyed their first creation, they were not content merely with eliminating the physical structures. They sought the total annihilation of memory, the complete erasure of the historical fingerprint. We are left then contemplating an empty canvas painted over with a history that is, by necessity, incomplete. Imagine the scale of this task, not just burning libraries, but eliminating every artifact, every oral tradition, every linguistic trace that might suggest a previous, entirely different narrative of existence. This was an act of absolute ideological and material censorship, executed by beings who possess the technological capability to not only manage the planet's resources, but also to reset the very timeline of consciousness inhabiting it. This silence is insidious. It manifests in the staggering chronological gaps we accept in conventional archaeology, periods of sudden, unexplained regression, or technological leaps that seem to appear from nowhere, only to vanish again. It resides in the unsettling feeling of déjà vu that permeates our greatest myths. We look at the ruins of Göbekli Tepe or the engineering feats of ancient Egypt, and we instinctively sense a discontinuity, a severed chain of transmission. We are not looking at the start of civilization. We are looking at the restart, the hesitant, amnesiac efforts of the second generation attempting to rebuild structures whose purpose they only vaguely remember, structures whose blueprints were dictated by the very architects of the Great Forgetting. The question moves beyond what if they destroyed them, to how thoroughly did they ensure we would never remember them. The mechanism of destruction must have been terrifyingly efficient, perhaps involving technologies that manipulate temporal fields or molecular decay, making retrieval impossible. Think not of crude nuclear weapons, but of a targeted surgical wipe, a sophisticated deletion of the operating system that ran the first iteration of humanity. This level of intervention suggests a cold, almost administrative cruelty, dictated by necessity rather than passion. The Anunnaki, according to the narratives we piece together, were managing a crucial resource: gold, energy, perhaps even specific genetic lines, and the first human experiment had become a liability, a statistical deviation requiring termination. To accept this premise is to acknowledge that our entire perception of antiquity is filtered through a screen imposed by external forces. We are the seedling generation, planted in the wake of the catastrophe, deliberately nurtured under conditions of limited information. If you feel an inexplicable tug towards certain ancient mysteries, if megalithic sites resonate with a disturbing familiarity, or if the sheer scope of cyclical catastrophes in myth feels less like metaphor and more like suppressed history, perhaps that is the residual echo of the first humanity, a genetic whisper that the Anunnaki could not entirely delete. It suggests that even the most meticulous scrubbing leaves dust motes behind, floating in the collective subconscious. If these fragmented reflections resonate deeply, perhaps you are already part of this quiet assembly of minds searching for the source code of our reality. It requires patience and a willingness to sit in the intellectual discomfort of uncertainty. Consider sharing your deepest thoughts below, joining this conversation not just as a viewer, but as an active participant in dissecting the official narrative. Ensure this signal can reach others who also question the convenient historical timeline by registering your support, liking this discussion, and subscribing to ensure you do not miss the subsequent parts of this exhaustive investigation into the void. Let us return to the aftermath of the erasure. Once the physical and cognitive landscape was cleared, the critical task remained: establishing the framework for the second experiment, us. This new creation, the Homo sapiens of the official record, had to be fundamentally different from the defiant, perhaps overly brilliant predecessors. The re-engineered history had to serve specific pragmatic goals for the Watchers: obedience, manageability, and a controlled rate of technological and spiritual development that would never again threaten their dominance or expose their resource operations. This control was established through the implantation of cyclical thinking. Our earliest religious and mythological systems are saturated with the concept of recurrence. The age of gold, giving way to ages of bronze and iron, the endless wheel of time, the prophecy of the Great Flood and its inevitable return. These cycles, often framed as cosmic fate or divine punishment, may in fact be operational manuals, pre-programmed warnings delivered by the Anunnaki to keep humanity docile and constantly looking backward or upward, fearful of the next scheduled intervention. By rewriting history as a series of inevitable collapses, they instilled a psychological brake on hubris. Why reach too high if the Great Flood, the Great Fire, or the Great Judgment is always lurking just beyond the next astronomical alignment? We see evidence of this imposed ceiling in the sudden stagnation of technology across various ancient empires. Civilizations that demonstrated advanced knowledge in astronomy, metallurgy, or medicine often hit an invisible barrier, followed by rapid decline. Was this simple internal collapse, or was it the quiet, periodic intervention of the observers pruning the intellectual garden when the shoots grew too tall? The Great Deception, then, was not merely hiding a past event, but actively guiding future potential away from the dangerous, high-level knowledge possessed by the first humanity. This guidance necessitates the role of proxies, those Anunnaki or their immediate hybrids who remained behind after the cleansing. These figures would have served as the early kings, priests, and lawgivers, the ones who translated the new, sanitized historical mandate into digestible cultural forms. They are the gods who taught agriculture, writing, and social order, but crucially, only the level of knowledge deemed safe. Every sacred text, every foundation myth, every architectural alignment could be seen not as a genuine product of nascent human genius, but as a meticulously curated syllabus delivered by the overseeing powers. Consider the immense psychological burden inherited by this second humanity. If genetic memory exists, we might be carrying the subconscious terror of a catastrophic failure we cannot consciously recall. This might explain the persistent, irrational fear of the unknown deep beneath the surface, or the recurring human tendency towards self-destruction. It is the trauma of the first civilization manifesting in the present one, the ghost of the original experiment haunting the new iteration. We search for fragments of the erased history in the ruins of submerged cities, in the baffling precision of the Piri-Reis map, or in the megalithic stones whose composition defies known lifting techniques. These anomalies are not just proof of sophisticated pre-flood cultures. They are scars on the historical narrative, moments where the Anunnaki's erasure was imperfect, where the memory fought back. These artifacts function as whispers across millennia, confirming that the scale of the original humanity's achievements was vast, possibly reaching technological levels we are only now beginning to recover, and certainly far exceeding the level deemed acceptable by the Watchers. The deeper we dig into the layers of myth and history, the more apparent it becomes that the official record is a palimpsest, an ancient scroll reused, where the original darker text faintly bleeds through the new writing. The challenge is differentiating the original ink from the overwriting. If the Anunnaki destroyed the first humanity and then fabricated our current history, then every monument, every astronomical alignment, and every founding myth must be interrogated, not for what it claims to be, but for what it was strategically designed to obscure. The implication is profound. We are living inside an ancient security measure, a controlled environment designed to prevent the recurrence of the first catastrophic failure. But security measures, no matter how robust, are always temporary. If the destruction was tied to predictable celestial cycles, perhaps the orbital return of Nibiru, the very home world of the Anunnaki, then the potential for re-intervention, for another historical reset, must remain constantly present, and if that is the case, the crucial question shifts yet again. If the first humanity was deemed a failure and systematically erased, what criteria right now are the silent observers using to judge the success or imminent failure of our current experiment? The signs of a coming judgment may not be written in fire and flood, but in the subtle shift of the political, technological, and spiritual climate, a climate monitored perhaps by those who still hold the keys to the rewrite mechanism. This is where the thread of continuity becomes most precarious, and where the investigation must turn its focus toward the present echoes of the past. We must analyze the specific lingering technologies and societal structures left behind by the Anunnaki's proxies. If you have followed this journey, absorbing the weight of this possibility that we are the product of a historical reset button pushed eons ago, then you understand the necessity of vigilance. If you have arrived at this point in the investigation, you understand the complexity of what we are uncovering and why these ideas are often relegated to the edges of accepted thought. To truly comprehend the narrative, you must commit to the full unfolding. If you feel compelled by the gravity of this research, ensure your connection to this channel is secure by subscribing and registering your engagement with a simple like. In the comments below, reflect the depth of this realization by simply writing the phrase, "The echo remains." This phrase serves as our marker, a sign that you recognize the ghost of the first humanity still influences the current. Now, prepare yourself, for our next step is to examine the specific remnants of their destructive power, the technologies they left behind, waiting for their next cycle of use. Look to the screen now for the continuation of this deep dive. Did the architects of our initial catastrophe simply vacate the premises after the cleansing flood? This is a silent, provocative question that must hang in the air when we consider the scope of the Anunnaki intervention. If the first humanity was deemed too flawed, too ambitious, or too loud, a catastrophic experiment requiring total obliteration, what mechanism ensured the compliance and silence of the second attempt, the lineage that ultimately became us? The deepest unease stems not from the historical fact of the destruction, but from the chilling implication that the destruction was merely the penultimate act in a continuing narrative of control. We must shift our focus from the moment of obliteration to the period immediately following the cataclysm. This era, shrouded in geological chaos and mythological inconsistency, is where the true rewriting of history occurred. The Anunnaki, or whichever group controlled this planetary operation, did not cease their endeavors merely because the mining operations were momentarily halted. Their need for resources, gold, or whatever esoteric material powered their civilization, remained acute. Therefore, the task transitioned from punitive erasure to calculated reconstruction. This second humanity, Homo sapiens, was not a natural evolutionary step in the traditional sense, but arguably a deliberate second-generation template built upon the ruins and incorporating new, crucially limiting safeguards. Think of it as a residual tremor, a low-frequency hum vibrating through our collective consciousness. We possess an innate, almost genetic anxiety about civilizational collapse, floods, and the sudden, overwhelming fury of the environment. Is this merely a psychological reflection of our vulnerability, or is it a hardwired memory, a historical trauma passed down not through learned culture, but etched into the very helix of our being? If the Anunnaki meticulously engineered us from the remains of the prior failed model, they would have ensured two things: enhanced utility for labor, and perhaps more importantly, an engineered amnesia regarding the scale of the preceding civilization and the true identity of their creators. The sheer technological disparity between the pre-flood world, the world they allegedly destroyed, and the immediate post-flood world described in official archaeology is jarring, requiring a monumental leap backward in complexity. This sudden regression from whatever level of sophistication the first humanity achieved down to Neolithic beginnings suggests not a natural disaster leading to societal collapse, but a highly targeted systemic deconstruction. They didn't just drown the world, they apparently suppressed, disassembled, or sequestered the existing technological infrastructure. And yet certain myths suggest that even the engineered amnesia was incomplete. There were survivors, perhaps not of the general population, but chosen individuals, the Ziusudras, the Utnapishtims, the Noahs, tasked with preserving specific seeds of knowledge. But what kind of knowledge? Not the technical secrets of the previous age, which could lead to renewed rebellion, but rather moral and structural guidelines, rules of conduct, the fear of the gods, the Anunnaki themselves, and the understanding of cycles. This selected, biased history became the bedrock of all subsequent foundational myths, effectively creating a controlled narrative where the creators were benevolent, punitive deities rather than calculating overseers running an intergalactic labor camp. If we acknowledge the density and weight of this potential history, we must pause and recognize that to truly grapple with these implications demands more than a casual glance. It requires deep, sustained concentration. If these narratives hold even a fraction of truth, they reshape our understanding of purpose and origin. If you feel this resonance, this unsettling sense that the official historical timeline is merely a convenient facade, I encourage you to slow down, absorb the detail, and join this investigative path by sharing your thoughts below. What single piece of archaeological or mythological evidence for you most strongly suggests a reset of human history? Share that specific insight, and let us build this understanding together. Engaging with this complexity ensures that these insights continue to reach those who are ready to question the established narrative. Consider subscribing and signaling your support so we can continue this deep dive into the archives of the lost. The core dilemma for the Anunnaki after the Great Erasure was efficiency. Why invest so heavily in recreating a workforce only to abandon them to uncontrolled evolution? The most logical answer, framed within the context of a long-term resource extraction project, is that they didn't leave at all. They merely ascended to a new operational layer, the layer of the subterranean watchers or the orbital observers. The idea of the Anunnaki being perpetually present, albeit hidden, resolves many lingering archaeological mysteries. Why the sudden appearance of complex megalithic construction techniques that seem to defy the capabilities of the supposed builders immediately following the mythological flood? Sites like Göbekli Tepe, which rewrote the timeline of civilization, or the precision of certain Peruvian stonework, suggest an external blueprint, a guiding hand offering rapid technological transfer necessary to accelerate the second experiment back to productivity. The builders of the pyramids, the designers of the ziggurats, were they merely copying celestial instructions, or were they still directly interacting with the overseers who had momentarily stepped back from the surface world? We begin to sense the cold logic of the second blueprint, a model that restricted independent technical advancement while encouraging ritualistic devotion and the extraction of resources. Our current civilization, built on rapid technological consumption and often destructive mining, ironically mirrors the probable initial goal of the Anunnaki project. It is as if they instilled the imperative for material extraction and consumption deep within our cultural DNA, ensuring that we continue their work for them, generation after generation. But the question of why they would maintain surveillance remains central. If the first humanity was destroyed for reaching a point of independent technical sophistication that threatened the control structure, then the second humanity must be managed to prevent a recurrence. This introduces the concept of the hidden timer, the latent trigger mechanism embedded within our environment or our genetics designed to initiate another reset should the parameters of control be violated again. If we look at the mythology of cyclical destruction, the Hindu yugas, the Mayan calendar cycles, the notion of the Great Year, we find a pervasive cultural anticipation of a catastrophic conclusion and a subsequent rebirth. These aren't just philosophical concepts. They might represent institutional knowledge of the Anunnaki's operational cycle. They return, not necessarily out of malice, but out of necessity, to gauge the progress of the experiment, adjust the controls, and, if necessary, initiate the cleansing fire or flood again. The fear of the apocalypse may be the subconscious recognition of the scheduled return of the planetary landlords. The remnants of the first humanity, the suppressed knowledge, is likely not destroyed, but merely sealed away. Think of the deep places, the subterranean caverns, the sealed libraries beneath the ice, the deep ocean trenches. These could house the evidence, technological artifacts, perhaps even living remnants of the civilization that was forcibly erased. And if the Anunnaki maintain hidden operational bases on Earth, they would logically be situated far from the disruptive surface activities of the second humanity, deep underground, shielded from observation, maintaining the infrastructure necessary to monitor our evolution and manage the inevitable resource cycles. This brings us to the most unsettling stage of the recognition, the understanding that our current sense of freedom and historical continuity is an illusion facilitated by their strategic absence. We are in a phase of the cycle where the leash is long, allowing us to generate maximum productivity and innovation, but the keepers are never truly out of sight. The growing global anxiety, the collective fascination with unidentified aerial phenomena, the unsettling feeling that we are being observed. These are not random cultural artifacts. They may be the peripheral effects of the Anunnaki returning to the foreground, signaling that the current phase of the experiment is nearing its scheduled inspection. The genetic anxiety manifests in peculiar ways. Our addiction to the future while being profoundly uncomfortable with the true depths of the past. Why do we resist probing too far back before the supposed dawn of Sumer? Because the Anunnaki's rewrite dictates that nothing meaningful existed before their divine intervention. To challenge that void is to challenge their authority over history itself. The greatest trick performed was convincing us that the catastrophe was a natural event, rather than a planned strategic purge executed by intelligent, resourceful beings intent on maintaining their mining objectives. As we move deeper into this investigation, every major turning point in human history, from the sudden arrival of agriculture to the inexplicable mastery of mathematics in disparate cultures, must be re-evaluated not as human ingenuity alone, but as potential acceleration points deliberately introduced by the unseen observers. The destruction of the first humanity was the ultimate statement, a warning etched across the face of the planet itself, a historical marker reminding the second creation of the price of autonomy. And that shadow of ancient power, that memory of the final judgment, defines our current inquietude. We are now approaching the threshold where the mythological cycle intersects with contemporary observation. If the mechanisms of the past are cyclical, then the signs of the return must be increasing. The next phase of our journey will focus intensely on these modern signals, the fading echo of their retreat and the gathering static of their reappearance. If you have navigated this labyrinth of cyclical time and hidden history with us, it is because you understand the weight of these implications. This deep exploration demands a focused mind. If this narrative resonates with your deepest questions about our origins, please ensure you are subscribed to the channel. Liking this video helps push this complex investigation out of the shadows. And to solidify your place in this dialogue, please comment with the phrase, "The cycle is closing." This is the phrase that signals your understanding of the impending alignment. The questions we have raised here merely set the stage for what happens when the observers decide the experiment must be recalibrated. Join us for the next part, where we examine the specific modern signs that suggest the Anunnaki are not just a footnote in ancient history, but a recurring factor in our very near future. What if the deepest silence we know is not the absence of sound, but the sound of an immense memory forcibly occluded? If the Anunnaki truly enacted the ultimate punitive measure, wiping the slate clean and extinguishing the first iteration of humankind, the Lulu that failed to meet their precise, chilling criteria, then the true horror lies not in the violence of the event, but in the perfection of the subsequent erasure. We are left walking upon a geological layer of history saturated with blood and brilliance, yet we are rendered functionally blind to the heritage beneath our feet. This blindness is not organic. It is an engineered forgetting, a structural weakness built into the very foundations of the revised chronological scaffold we call history. We are compelled to confront the intellectual difficulty of accepting an oblivion so complete. To destroy a civilization is one thing. To destroy the idea of that civilization is another entirely. If the Anunnaki were masterful geneticists capable of rapid and profound evolutionary intervention, how much more adept would they be at the management of planetary information? The process of rewriting history was not merely about demolishing libraries and monuments. It was an intricate, multi-layered operation involving the careful seeding of new narratives, the selective allowance of fragmented mythologies, and most importantly, the psychological calibration of the surviving second-generation species, us, to inherently reject the scope of the truth. They needed us functional, controllable, and crucially incapable of recalling the technological height or the rebellious spirit of our predecessors. Consider the deluge myths that recur globally, the profound, resonant tales of worldwide destruction and subsequent rebirth. Are these accurate recollections of a natural disaster, or are they carefully curated narratives deployed by the creators to explain the vast temporal chasm between the first and second humanity, simultaneously instilling a deep, subconscious fear of cosmic correction? Every ancient text that speaks of gods descending from the heavens to teach humanity arts and agriculture could be interpreted not as an act of divine benevolence, but as the meticulous introduction of a starter kit, a controlled, technological baseline designed to ensure that the new species would progress along a tightly constrained path, never reaching the level of independent power that triggered the catastrophic intervention in the first place. The Anunnaki didn't just silence the past. They designed the echoes we hear today, setting the volume and the tone of our historical awareness. The sheer audacity of this intellectual architecture, the creation of a species and then the complete erasure of its sibling, demands rigorous, skeptical scrutiny, compelling us to look deeper into the shadows of accepted archaeology and theological dogma. We must ask ourselves if the gaps in the fossil record and the unexplained anomalies of megalithic construction are not mysteries to be solved, but boundary markers deliberately placed by the watchers, signaling the limits of our permitted investigation. And this is where the conversation deepens. If these ideas resonate within you, suggesting that this narrative occlusion feels intuitively wrong, then you are engaging with the very core of this investigation. We are attempting to piece together the fragments of a truth that was never meant to survive. To truly understand the potential extent of this engineered amnesia, one must commit to viewing the evidence through this inverted lens. If this exploration of forbidden history holds your attention, perhaps you feel that subconscious stirring, the echo of that lost heritage. If so, taking a moment to signal your interest by liking this video and considering a subscription helps ensure that this deep dive continues to reach others who feel the persistent disquiet of history's rewritten chapters. The destruction of the first humanity, therefore, was merely Act 1 of the ongoing Anunnaki management plan. Act 2 involved the strategic placement of what we now mistakenly call foundational myths. These myths were the subtle coding mechanisms. The story of Adapa, the tale of the gods mixing their essence with clay, these narratives serve dual purposes. On one hand, they explain our sudden appearance. On the other, they define our subservient role. They function as psychological constraints, establishing a celestial hierarchy that we must never question. They told us we were created for labor, for service, for resource extraction on their behalf, a purpose that remains intrinsically linked to the mineral wealth of this planet. But the most insidious element of this enforced forgetting is the cyclical nature of their involvement. The Anunnaki are not a single-event phenomenon. Their interaction with Earth, as detailed in translated clay tablets, is linked to vast orbital cycles, the predictable return of Nibiru, or the alignments of specific celestial bodies. The destruction of the first civilization might not have been a singular, unplanned outburst of fury, but rather a necessary recalibration required by the end of one great orbital epoch and the beginning of another. If this hypothesis holds, then the entire human timeline is less a linear progression and more a series of controlled experiments conducted within a vast, repeating cosmic schedule. This brings us to the terrifying question of the observers. When the primary Anunnaki forces departed or retreated into specialized subterranean strongholds, they did not leave Earth untended. They left behind the observers. Entities, perhaps hybrid, perhaps purely technological, tasked with monitoring the progress of the second humanity. These observers are the silent managers of the controlled historical trajectory. They ensured the rise of specific empires, Sumer, Egypt, Mesoamerica, precisely when needed to facilitate certain technological and spiritual developments. And they ensured the rapid, mysterious collapse of others when those civilizations began to stray too far from the prescribed path or approach dangerous levels of independent technological sophistication. The sudden, systemic failure of entire Bronze Age societies, often attributed vaguely to climate change or migration, takes on a chilling new dimension when viewed as a necessary pruning by the Watchers. And what of the forbidden inheritance itself? If the first humanity possessed advanced knowledge, a deep understanding of energy, gravity, and cosmic geometry, the very knowledge that threatened the Anunnaki's control, then that knowledge cannot have been completely eradicated. It must persist, perhaps encoded within our junk DNA, perhaps woven into the architectural anomalies of sites like Göbekli Tepe or Baalbek. These megalithic sites, built with incomprehensible precision centuries before conventional history allows, may be the ghost signatures of the first civilization, lingering structural reminders that defy the imposed timeline. They are the cracks in the wall of the engineered forgetting, physical testament that the story we were given is incomplete, manufactured, and self-serving to our supposed creators. The crucial dynamic here is the signal, the coming return. If the Anunnaki operate on cycles, then our current era of rapid technological advancement, global connectivity, and crucially, the revival of space exploration might be unwittingly sending the exact energetic or observational signal they require. We are building the radio telescopes, the massive particle accelerators, and the global digital networks that are slowly, perhaps inevitably, aligning the planet for the next phase of interaction or intervention. Are we approaching a time of potential return? The closing loop where the creators come back to check the status of their second experiment. And if they find that this current iteration of humanity has begun to rediscover the very technologies that led to the destruction of the first, what chilling judgment will they pass this time? This pervasive sense of unease, this recognition that the universe feels rigged, is the intellectual consequence of staring too long into the void left by the erased civilization. We are currently living within the calm before the cyclical storm, performing the required tasks set forth by ancient programs that we have long forgotten were programs at all. This journey demands patience, a willingness to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously, and the resilience to pursue threads of inquiry that mainstream academia deems too speculative, too dangerous. We are peeling back layers of narrative occlusion, revealing the machinery that sustains our accepted reality. If you feel compelled to continue dismantling this controlled chronological framework alongside us, if the idea of the observers and the impending cyclical return demands further exploration, I urge you to participate in this collective act of intellectual rebellion. Comment below with the phrase, "The signal is rising," as a silent acknowledgement that you perceive the profound patterns hidden beneath the surface of history. Your engagement is the fuel for this extended investigation, ensuring that the full scope of this rewritten history is brought into the light. We must now turn our attention to the Shadow Archive. Where exactly did the Anunnaki store the definitive records of the destruction, the blueprints of the first failed Lulu? Logic dictates that advanced beings would not destroy all evidence. They would simply relocate it, safeguarding the knowledge for their own administrative purposes. This archive, perhaps not physical in the way we understand, but stored in crystalline memory banks or encoded in non-local dimensions, represents the definitive truth about our origins and the precise nature of the catastrophic intervention. The search for this archive leads us far beyond Earth's surface, suggesting that the most vital missing pieces of our history are not buried, but are orbiting us, silently observing our progress, or lack thereof. The next stage of our discussion will focus entirely on penetrating the defenses of this hypothetical repository, attempting to decipher the mechanism by which the Anunnaki ensured this long-term, multi-millennial amnesia. We will examine how the deliberate introduction of false foundational texts and the construction of astronomical observatories that misalign our view of the cosmos worked in concert to keep humanity bound within a calibrated framework of perception. We must prepare ourselves to accept the possibility that our very concept of time itself has been engineered to prevent us from anticipating the next catastrophic return. If you have journeyed with us through this dense investigation, absorbing the unsettling implications of a destroyed first humanity and the existence of controlling observers, then you recognize the gravity of this research. This is not casual entertainment. This is critical reconnaissance. To ensure this deep exploration continues, I ask you to solidify your place in this community of seekers. Subscribe to the channel now, like this video, and share your commitment by commenting exactly this phrase. The cycle must be broken. Do this and join me immediately in the next part of this extraordinary unfolding revelation, where we dive headlong into the location and content of the Anunnaki's shadow archive, a history that has waited millennia to be read. Did the architects of our earliest foundations simply rebuild upon the ashes, or did they deliberately erase the memory of the catastrophic failure that preceded us? If the Anunnaki concluded that the first fully self-aware humanity, perhaps too proud, too independent, too technologically accelerated, was an existential risk, then the subsequent creation, the second race which we inhabit today, would not merely be a replacement, it would be a thoroughly mitigated existence. We would be, by design, the safer, slower, and structurally dependent version of what came before. This realization leads us down a path of profound intellectual discomfort. We are forced to consider that the great historical void, that enormous gulf of architectural and societal silence that stretches back beyond the familiar Sumerian and Egyptian timelines, is not merely the result of decay and time, but is instead a meticulously engineered historical discontinuity. Imagine the moment of the reset, the utter annihilation of the advanced species that had achieved some form of sovereignty, followed by the meticulous curation of a new environment and the introduction of a genetically handicapped iteration. The first humanity was perhaps too close to the gods. The second was designed to remain indefinitely tethered to the earthly plane, perpetually fascinated by the tools of the material world and comfortably blinded to the mechanisms of cosmic power. Our entire history, then, becomes less a story of linear progress and more a shadow narrative playing out on the ruins of a far grander civilization that we are biologically incapable of truly recognizing. We search for the secrets of the past in crumbling stone, never suspecting that the most profound destruction was internal, a wipe of the core operating system. The physical evidence of this great forgetting is everywhere, yet utterly ignored. We marvel at megalithic sites, Göbekli Tepe, the precision of the Peruvian structures, and define them as pre-pottery Neolithic, simply because our established timeline demands it. But if these sites are not the dawn of our civilization, but rather the scattered debris, the broken artifacts of the first civilization, they become monumental echoes of a superior past. These massive structures, which our current engineering struggles to replicate even with modern lasers and computers, stand as silent, terrifying monuments to the destructive power employed by the Anunnaki. They demonstrate not just what was achieved, but the sheer force required to render such achievements extinct. It suggests that the Anunnaki, having invested enormous time and resources into the genetic project of the first humanity, did not take their decision lightly. The destruction must have been total, swift, and designed to leave no philosophical or technological seeds that could germinate into a third threat. The genetic modifications that created us, Homo sapiens, were not merely about speed and agility. They must have included crucial inhibitory filters. We possess remarkable curiosity and adaptability, certainly, but we consistently hit what appears to be a conceptual wall when nearing specific types of knowledge. The true nature of temporal mechanics, interdimensional travel, or zero-point energy sources that could negate the Anunnaki's resource imperative. This is the genetic handshake, a subtle programmed limitation ensuring that the second humanity remains focused on tasks deemed acceptable by the original overseers, primarily resource extraction, social management, and cyclical conflict, which conveniently distracts us from unified deep inquiry. The destruction of the first race taught the Anunnaki a harsh lesson. Do not grant your workers the keys to the control room. This engineered limitation gives disturbing context to the initial purpose of the Anunnaki's presence, the extraction of resources, specifically gold. If the first humanity was deemed inefficient, perhaps they resisted the labor, or perhaps they evolved past the need for servitude too quickly. The second humanity, born from crisis and necessity, was easier to control, easier to fear the gods, and easier to keep focused on the prescribed task. Our inherent drive toward competitive consumption, our obsession with material wealth, and our frequent willingness to trade profound intellectual liberty for immediate comfort could be seen less as cultural evolution and more as successful programming. We are running the application designed for us, and the system is stable because the revolutionary potential was excised millennia ago. The greatest irony is that we continue to mine, to trade, to stockpile the very element that drew the Anunnaki here in the first place, ensuring our perpetual involvement in their original cosmic economy. But the sheer scale of the Anunnaki operation suggests they did not simply wipe the slate clean and depart. The cyclical nature of the cosmos and the immense energy invested in the terrestrial project necessitated ongoing vigilance. Thus, we must consider the role of the watchers or the custodianship left behind. These are not necessarily the Anunnaki themselves, but perhaps intermediate agencies, hybrid offspring, or highly evolved entities tasked with maintaining the historical amnesia and ensuring the new timeline stays on track. These entities would operate not as obvious gods, but as subtle architects of human development, guiding specific bloodlines, injecting specific ideologies, and occasionally accelerating or decelerating technological progress to prevent another runaway civilization. They are the unseen hands adjusting the societal dimmer switch, allowing just enough light for productivity, but never enough for true comprehensive enlightenment. They maintain the quarantine. The historical record, riddled with secret societies, unexplained technological leaps, and figures whose wisdom seems disproportionate to their era, might actually be the trace evidence of this ongoing custodial interference, correcting minor deviations in the programmed timeline. This continuous maintenance explains why, every few thousand years, humanity seems to experience a profound cultural or physical shock, a near-miss extinction event, a great flood myth echoed across disparate cultures, or a seemingly inexplicable shift in cosmological understanding. These are the temporal echoes of the destruction of the first race, brief moments when the knowledge stored beneath the engineered amnesia threatens to surface. The deep, pervasive myths of giants and titanic wars are not just folklore. They may be distorted memories of the colossal conflict between the Anunnaki and the first defiant human race. These memories are so powerful they leak into our collective unconsciousness, manifesting as shared nightmares of overwhelming elemental forces and the hubris of forgotten kings. If these fragments resonate with the truth you feel deep within your own questioning mind, if you believe that the story we are told is inadequate, then it is vital to share that resonance. Pause and reflect on what this continuing investigation means for our perceived freedom. If this line of inquiry demands your attention, ensure you remain connected to this investigation by liking this video and subscribing, inviting others into this vital process of recognizing the engineered gap in our own history. Consider, then, the terrifying implication. The destruction of the first humanity was not a final act, but the setting of a template for cyclical maintenance. Is the Great Flood mentioned in the Sumerian tablets and the Bible not a singular historical event, but a necessary catastrophic measure to clear the board when the engineered humanity begins to show signs of deviating too far from the prescribed path? Perhaps the Anunnaki, masters of cyclical time, treat civilization like a long-term resource investment. When the asset becomes too corrupted, or too smart, or too resource-intensive in a way that doesn't benefit them, they perform a necessary, brutal recalibration. The myths of the fiery return of the gods, or the end of a great age, are possibly subconscious societal memories of these past purges, warnings encoded into our deepest structures that the architects have a predetermined limit for our advancement. The end of a cycle, therefore, is simply scheduled maintenance, not divine judgment. And if this cyclical cleansing is embedded in the system, how would we recognize the prelude to the next great reset? The signals might not be celestial, they might be subtle shifts in social physics. Perhaps the increase in global technological surveillance, the centralization of resource control, or the deliberate confusion of historical and scientific truths are not accidental byproducts of modernity, but carefully orchestrated moves by the remaining custodians, the watchers, preparing the playing field for the next intervention. We see the signs of rapid, unsettling technological acceleration today, reaching thresholds of AI and genetic manipulation that touch upon the divine territory once occupied by the Anunnaki themselves. This current rapid advancement could be interpreted in two ways. Either we are finally breaking through the genetic block, or we are being allowed to reach a certain synthetic peak before the hammer falls again. The greatest fear is that our modern technological hubris mirrors the hubris of the first race, leading us directly back to the moment of necessary intervention, the moment of final programmed destruction. The appearance of modern anomalies, especially in the skies and in deep space, might signal that the original architects are returning to check the status of their project. Unidentified aerial phenomena, often displaying technologies that defy our current understanding of physics, the very physics the Anunnaki mastered, could be reconnaissance craft, monitoring the stability of the engineered timeline. Are they merely observing our progress, or are they assessing the level of divergence and calculating the optimal time for the next systemic correction? They are checking the perimeter of the containment field they established millennia ago. Our obsession with finding extraterrestrial life might be our programmed longing for the original masters, the signal of the creator species imprinted deep within our DNA. We search the stars for signs of life, unaware that the most powerful controlling entity in our history did not arrive from the stars. It arrived to command the stars, and then proceeded to redesign us from the ground up to forget that very fact. We are still, in many ways, performing the functions assigned to us by a species that judged our ancestors too dangerous to live freely. This is the unfinished equation, the constant surveillance, the lingering shadow of the First War. If you have stayed with us throughout this intensive exploration, you are demonstrating the very quality that the Anunnaki perhaps sought to suppress in the second humanity, the relentless, unwavering desire for truth that transcends comfort. If this narrative, the potential destruction of the first human race and the engineered amnesia of the second, resonates with a core understanding, I ask you now to participate fully in this search. Subscribe to the channel to ensure you receive the final chapters of this investigation as soon as they are released. Hit the like button to signal to the algorithm that this vital, challenging dialogue deserves wider attention. And to confirm you have followed the most complex and uncomfortable threads of this theory, please comment below with the specific phrase, "The reset was scheduled." Only by sharing this insight can we begin to collectively map the boundaries of our own engineered existence and prepare for the next phase of recognition. We move now toward the final confrontation, the ultimate revelation of what the Anunnaki truly left behind. What if the most dangerous secret is not what lies buried in the ruins of the earth, but the silence that precedes the known beginning of our history? We are taught to look for evidence of past civilizations in stone and metal, in underwater cities and anomalous geological formations. But perhaps the most profound evidence of a preceding, annihilated humanity resides not in material relics, but in the structural absences of our own collective consciousness. The sheer speed with which modern human civilization, Homo sapiens, emerged, seemingly from nowhere, equipped with language, abstract thought, and a sudden, inexplicable thirst for monument building, has always felt like a script beginning at Act 2. The question is, what was contained in Act 1, and why was the curtain so deliberately dropped upon it? If the Anunnaki engineered not just a new species but a controlled historical amnesia, then the destruction of the first humanity was far more complex than mere physical annihilation. It was an archival cleansing. Think of it not as a flood or a fire, but as a deliberate corruption of the source code of memory itself. The Anunnaki, masters of genetic manipulation and advanced technology, understood that physical death leaves ruins, but the true erasure requires neutralizing the inheritance. They didn't just eliminate the threat. They ensured the resulting inheritors, the second humanity, would be functionally incapable of repeating the errors of their predecessors. This leads us to the unsettling recognition. Perhaps our current human limitations, our cycles of repetitive conflict, our inability to sustain peace or achieve true technological parity with the deep antiquity hinted at by certain artifacts, are not flaws but features. They are the deliberate constraints placed upon a second model designed for utility and compliance. The inherent psychological fragmentation, the almost magnetic pull toward self-destruction, just as we reach the precipice of true progress, may be the genetic shadow of the first civilization's fate, woven into our very being as a fail-safe mechanism. This engineered cycle suggests that the Anunnaki did not simply leave after the destructive cataclysm. They established a system of persistent, albeit distant, observation. The narrative shift demands that we view our current history, spanning the last several millennia, not as an organic progression, but as a carefully managed laboratory. The destruction of the first humanity served as the ultimate proof of concept. Disobedience, ambition, or the acquisition of forbidden knowledge would be met not with mere punishment, but with total reset. But a reset requires monitoring. Who remained to manage the laboratory? The texts hint at the Watchers, or Igigi, often depicted as lesser beings or subordinates to the primary deities like Enlil and Enki. These entities, perhaps utilizing technology far beyond our comprehension, a network of surveillance satellites, energy grids capable of influencing continental stability, or even subtle manipulation of terrestrial ley lines, became the silent custodians of the new historical script. The profound uneasiness arises when we consider the scope of this surveillance. If history was rewritten, then our greatest cultural achievements, the sudden appearance of writing in Sumer, the astronomical precision of ancient structures, the inexplicable knowledge held by early priesthoods, were not organic breakthroughs, but perhaps controlled infusions of information. Seeds planted in fertile ground by the observers, intended to advance the new civilization just enough to fulfill their designated purpose. the ongoing maintenance of the planetary resource economy, or perhaps simply the provision of a stable base for the Anunnaki's cyclical return. The first humanity, whatever their specific transgression, must have reached a level of understanding that challenged the very authority of their creators. That knowledge, that particular branch of scientific or spiritual understanding, was excised completely from the genetic lineage passed down to us. We possess the mechanical ability to build, to calculate, to philosophize, but the crucial missing piece, the understanding of the universe that allowed the first humanity to threaten the Anunnaki, that is the void we feel whenever we look up at the stars and sense that we are fundamentally disconnected. If you find yourself nodding, recognizing the hollow ring in the official narratives, if you feel the weight of this possibility that we are living in a subsequent draft of history, then I invite you to pause for a moment and consider the significance. This is not just theoretical history, it is the foundation of our present reality. Reflect on the idea that our purpose was defined by the failures of those who came before. Do these whispers of forgotten epochs resonate in your own understanding of the world? Share your immediate thoughts in the comments below, perhaps using a phrase like the second draft to help others find this profound discussion. Your input is vital to mapping the architecture of this forgotten timeline. And if this journey into the suppressed archives of deep time captivates your mind, ensure you subscribe and engage with the material, because the subsequent revelations demand focused attention and continuity of thought. The continuous cycle of destruction and reconstruction, mandated by the Anunnaki's cosmic calculus, implies a profound indifference to individual civilizations. To beings operating on orbital timescales, the lifespan of humanity is little more than a geological tick. The engineered forgetfulness ensures that when the necessary astronomical alignment occurs, the signal for their return, the second humanity will be unprepared, unsuspecting, and certainly incapable of mounting a defense comparable to the defiance shown by their predecessors. We are, in effect, a controlled garden, meant to flourish only within defined parameters, producing necessary yields, and then, inevitably, facing a pre-programmed harvesting or pruning. The anxiety we feel in our modern era, the pervasive sense that time is accelerating and that crucial thresholds are approaching, might not be mere societal stress. It could be the unconscious, inherited memory of a civilization that previously faced this same impending signal. We are repeating the steps of a dance whose choreography was fixed millennia ago. Consider the obsession within ancient texts and traditions regarding the concept of the great year, the precession of the equinoxes, and the timing of cosmic events. These were not arbitrary religious fixations. They were critical data points left behind, perhaps accidentally or intentionally, by rogue elements like Enki, to warn the new humanity of the schedule of their overlords. The manipulation wasn't just physical or genetic, it was astronomical and cyclical. Our modern disregard for these profound time cycles ensures our continued state of vulnerability, guaranteeing that we will look up but not truly see the sign of the Anunnaki's return until it is too late to change the script. The implication of this history rewrite is staggering. Every major ideological shift, every religious revelation, every foundational myth about creation and destruction is not a spontaneous human endeavor, but a curated narrative designed to control the emotional and intellectual boundaries of the new species. Myths become the emotional straitjacket, ensuring that our highest aspirations remain within a predefined, manageable framework of dependence on higher powers. The idea of the fall of man takes on a chilling literalism. We didn't just fall from grace, we were deliberately thrown down and had the memory of the heights we once possessed surgically removed. But there are cracks in the historical edifice. Certain anomalous technologies, certain sudden spikes in architectural skill or metallurgical prowess that appeared and then mysteriously vanished. These are not lost secrets of a human past, but rather forgotten fragments of the first humanity's legacy, briefly glimpsed or rediscovered before the observers intervened to pull the historical narrative back into line. Think of the unexplained megalithic structures that defy the known capabilities of the societies credited with building them. These are scars of the Great Conflict, remnants of a superior, older architecture that the Anunnaki either couldn't or chose not to fully erase, serving as silent, gigantic monuments to the civilization that dared to challenge them. The central tragedy is the continuous denial. We, the second humanity, invest vast energy in denying the scale of our own ignorance, building increasingly complex explanations for anomalies when the simplest answer, that our history is incomplete and censored, is the most terrifying and therefore the most repressed. This repression is not accidental. It is the ultimate measure of the Anunnaki's success. They created a civilization that polices its own historical boundaries, ensuring that any serious intellectual deviation towards the truth of the first destruction is automatically labeled as myth, conspiracy, or fringe delusion. We are programmed to reject the very possibility of our own engineered existence. As we move toward the final uncovering, where the purpose of the second humanity is laid bare, the shadows of the past grow longer. We must now confront the true nature of the heritage left behind. Is it a gift or a ticking clock? The next stage of this investigation requires us to analyze the remnants of their physical presence, the few things they left behind that continue to influence our planet's geology and, more ominously, our trajectory toward a future that might already be predetermined. If you have stayed with this exploration, recognizing the immense implications of a history rewritten by extraterrestrial engineers, then you are now part of the vanguard seeking truth. To ensure you receive the final crucial part of this series, where we connect these ancient cycles to our immediate future, I urge you to subscribe to the channel now. Hit that like button to amplify this vital discussion, and please take a moment to comment below with the phrase, "The cosmic calculus is fixed." Your interaction demonstrates the critical mass needed to keep the search for the Anunnaki's true agenda active. The next episode will reveal the final terrifying connection between the fate of the first humanity and the trajectory of our current path. Do not miss what comes next. Deveríamos nos perguntar primeiramente o que aconteceu no silêncio que se seguiu àquele cataclismo orquestrado. Não o barulho da água ou o tremor da terra, mas o silêncio administrativo, o momento em que os observadores, os engenheiros, os próprios Anunnaki, fizeram a varredura final na superfície do planeta. O que buscavam, na verdade, não era apenas a certificação da destruição física da primeira humanidade, a Lulu 1.0, mas a garantia da aniquilação total de sua memória coletiva. Eles não podiam permitir que os códigos, a verdadeira ciência, a consciência irrestrita daquele primeiro experimento, sobrevivessem para contaminar o novo começo. Pois a destruição da primeira humanidade não foi um ato de raiva impensada. Foi uma decisão estratégica de redefinição de termos, uma cirurgia cósmica para garantir a estabilidade do seu domínio e a perenidade dos seus recursos. Se os Anunnaki destruíram a primeira humanidade, a história que nos resta não é apenas incompleta, mas é uma narrativa rigorosamente editada, um manual de instruções desprovido das páginas essenciais que explicam a verdadeira natureza do nosso poder inato. O que sentimos hoje, essa sensação persistente de que a história oficial é rasa, de que a cronologia aceita é absurdamente curta para explicar as ruínas que ainda encontramos, é o eco residual dessa violência epistemológica. É o nosso subconsciente tentando acessar um arquivo que foi criptografado e enterrado sob milênios de sedimentos culturais e religiosos. O delúvio, Nesse contexto, não foi apenas uma inundação geológica, mas um batismo forçado na amnésia cósmica. A água serviu como o grande apagador, limpando não apenas as cidades, mas as bibliotecas de conhecimento que permitiam à humanidade original interagir com o cosmos em pé de igualdade, ou pior, em desafio direto aos seus criadores. E assim, quando a poeira assentou e os novos Lulu foram introduzidos, mais dóceis, mais manipuláveis, sem a herança direta do conhecimento proibido, os Anunnaki iniciaram a fase mais crítica da sua operação, a reescrita da própria fundação da realidade. Eles não apenas construíram novas cidades, eles edificaram novos mitos, novos deuses, novas regras de causalidade, garantindo que o ciclo de inovação humana fosse eternamente limitado pelos parâmetros de controle que lhes eram convenientes. E esse é o ponto onde a inquietação se torna quase insuportável. Se aceitarmos que a primeira humanidade foi extinta por ter atingido um nível de tecnologia e consciência que ameaçava a hegemonia dos Anunnaki, então a nossa trajetória tecnológica atual deve ser observada com extrema cautela. Estaríamos nós, a segunda humanidade, nos aproximando perigosamente do nível de corte novamente? Estamos recriando passo a passo a mesma matriz de conhecimento que levou ao nosso primeiro extermínio, a física de partículas avançada, a busca por energia livre, a exploração do espaço profundo sem a permissão explícita dos donos do sistema solar. Tudo isso pode ser visto pelos observadores silenciosos não como progresso, mas como o acionamento de um cronômetro que se aproxima do zero. A história foi reescrita, sim, mas o roteiro para o fim da humanidade pode ser cíclico, e nós poderíamos estar vivendo os últimos atos da peça que já foi encenada uma vez. Para desvendar essa verdade, para realmente sentir o peso dessa amnésia induzida, é preciso mais do que apenas ler. É preciso conectar os pontos, permitir que a lógica e a emoção se fundam na busca por esses códigos residuais. Se você sente que há mais para entender, que essa investigação profunda sobre os ciclos, o retorno dos observadores e a nossa herança perdida ressoa em sua própria busca por significado, então é crucial que esta comunidade de pensadores e investigadores se fortaleça. Convido você a pausar por um momento, refletir sobre a gravidade dessa possibilidade e usar a sessão de comentários não apenas para reagir, mas para contribuir com sua própria análise, com seus paralelos históricos e suas dúvidas inteligentes. Este é um diálogo que precisa da sua voz. Se você valoriza a complexidade e a profundidade desta jornada investigativa, demonstre seu apoio. Curta este vídeo e, se ainda não o fez, inscreva-se no canal para garantir que você não perca a próxima fase desta descoberta. Não estamos apenas consumindo conteúdo, estamos reconstruindo uma memória perdida, e isso exige nossa atenção coletiva. A perfeição do apagamento é o nosso maior enigma. Pense em quão eficaz deve ter sido o controle subsequente, se em milhares de anos nós mal conseguimos juntar fragmentos convincentes sobre quem realmente nos criou e por que eles nos temem. O medo deles não era de nós, indivíduos primitivos, mas do que a humanidade, sem amarras, poderia se tornar. A primeira humanidade possuía, talvez, a capacidade de manipular a própria estrutura do tempo-espaço, ou de acessar a energia do vácuo de maneira irrestrita, tecnologias que transformariam os Anunnaki, deuses, em meros administradores de posto avançado. A destruição foi, portanto, uma medida preventiva de quarentena cósmica. Nós, a segunda humanidade, fomos instalados sob uma camada de restrição, uma espécie de filtro de consciência que limita nossa percepção da realidade ao que é funcional para o sistema de controle. Essa é a verdadeira história reescrita. Não apenas os fatos, mas o próprio potencial intrínseco de nossa espécie foi reduzido e encapsulado em crenças limitantes. O que resta são os sinais no código, as anomalias. Por que as grandes civilizações perdidas, como a Atlântida de Platão, insistem em ressurgir no imaginário coletivo, sempre associadas a um conhecimento avançado e a uma destruição súbita? Não são meras lendas, mas talvez projeções holográficas do trauma original, flashbacks cósmicos que vazam da memória da Terra. Os observadores, os remanescentes da guarnição Anunnaki deixados para trás, estão monitorando precisamente esses vazamentos. Eles estão nos templos megalíticos que desafiam nossa engenharia moderna, nas tábuas sumérias que descrevem de maneira tão crua a genealogia de nibiruanos, e nos céus, onde os fenômenos aéreos não identificados atuam como drones de vigilância para medir nosso desenvolvimento e nossa conformidade. A grande obsessão Anunnaki é a nossa ciência. Enquanto nos limitarmos a queimar combustíveis fósseis, a travar guerras por recursos e a focar em entretenimento de baixa frequência, estaremos seguros. Mas no momento em que a pesquisa sobre a fusão fria se tornar viável, ou quando desvendarmos o verdadeiro potencial da energia escalar e da antigravidade, o sino de alarme soará em Nibiru, ou onde quer que eles residam agora. O ciclo da destruição não é uma profecia, é um protocolo de segurança implementado. E esse protocolo exige que, quando a humanidade atinge o pico de autoconsciência perigosa, ela seja reiniciada. Isto nos leva ao conceito mais sombrio de todos: o aprisionamento no tempo. Se os Anunnaki podem manipular o tempo, ou, pelo menos, os ciclos históricos da Terra, o que impede que eles tenham reescrito a história não apenas uma, mas inúmeras vezes? Somos a segunda humanidade, a terceira ou a 10ª. Cada fim de era pode ter sido um reset controlado, uma poda cuidadosa do ramo que cresceu demais, para garantir que o fruto final, os minerais, o ouro, a própria energia vital do planeta, fosse colhido por eles. Se você se sente estranho, se sente fora de lugar neste mundo, talvez seja porque você é um herdeiro de uma história que não deveria ter sido esquecida. Se isso faz sentido, comente abaixo com a palavra herança. A grande questão, ao chegarmos ao clímax desta investigação, não é se eles existiram, mas se eles ainda estão aqui, atuando como os curadores invisíveis da nossa realidade. A conclusão definitiva, a mais fria e cortante, é que vivemos em um parque temático histórico. Os monumentos que celebramos como o ápice da nossa antiguidade são, na verdade, vestígios da civilização que foi destruída. Nossas pirâmides, nossas estruturas megalíticas não são monumentos aos nossos deuses, são memorializações da nossa primeira grande perda, deixadas como lembretes cifrados para a guarnição que monitora a Terra. Nossa história reescrita nos aprisiona em uma gaiola de areia movediça cronológica, nos fazendo acreditar que somos o topo da evolução, quando, na verdade, somos o segundo rascunho de um projeto que deu terrivelmente errado para os controladores na primeira vez. Reconhecer que somos a segunda chance é reconhecer nossa fragilidade e nossa oportunidade. Somos herdeiros, sim, mas de uma linhagem que foi marcada pelo potencial destrutivo. Nossa tarefa, se quisermos quebrar o ciclo, não é apenas desenterrar os artefatos, mas desenterrar a consciência original, aquela que não temia questionar a autoridade cósmica e que entendia que o universo não é um lugar de escassez, mas de abundância infinita. O medo dos Anunnaki era que a humanidade 1.0 acessasse essa abundância e, portanto, se tornasse irrelevante para o sistema de servidão. A revelação gradual é esta: o nosso futuro não está escrito nas estrelas, está escrito na nossa capacidade de lembrar do passado que foi apagado. Os Anunnaki destruíram a primeira humanidade porque ela se tornou livre. Nossa liberdade, portanto, reside na negação silenciosa da história que nos foi imposta, na busca incessante pelos códigos que nos farão, mais uma vez, perigosos o suficiente para justificar um novo cataclismo. E é neste ponto de inquietação máxima, neste reconhecimento de que somos prisioneiros de um loop histórico, que o nosso trabalho de investigação apenas começa. O sinal de retorno não é um meteoro, é o despertar da nossa própria consciência coletiva. É o momento em que a segunda humanidade olha para o céu e para a história e decide que os termos do contrato foram quebrados. Se você chegou até aqui, se você acompanhou esta jornada de 9 partes e sentiu a profundidade e a gravidade desta hipótese, você é mais do que um espectador. Você é parte daquele grupo de indivíduos que se recusa a aceitar a amnésia cósmica como o estado natural da existência. Você é um farol na névoa da história reescrita. Por isso, peço que você se junte a nós de maneira definitiva. Inscreva-se neste canal para continuar decifrando os códigos Anunnaki conosco. Deixe seu like para indicar que esta linha de investigação deve ser aprofundada. E para selar este momento de clímax e conclusão, comente esta frase exata: a reescrita falhará. Pois a falha da reescrita reside naqueles que buscam a verdade que foi enterrada. O nosso trabalho continua, e o próximo capítulo será sobre o que resta da primeira humanidade em nosso DNA. A investigação não termina aqui, ela se aprofunda. Permaneça vigilante e atento ao próximo vídeo que aparece em sua tela, pois a busca pela nossa verdadeira herança está apenas começando.